1962. Hundreds of paparazzi chased Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton through the streets of Rome. Every restaurant, every hotel, every corner. The two stars couldn't hide. The press called them Le Scandale. Every day brought new photos, new headlines. Liz and Dick caught kissing. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, because this is the story of how modern paparazzi culture was born, how privacy completely disappeared, and how two stars fought against the entire world. Before the 1960s, Hollywood stars were protected. Studios controlled their image. The press cooperated too. Scandals were covered up. If a star had an affair, the studio would hide it. Newspapers would ask permission before writing. Hollywood was like a family. Dirty laundry stayed inside. But the Cleopatra set changed everything. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's relationship was too big to hide. Italian paparazzi found them. They shot photos with long lenses. When Elizabeth and Richard entered a restaurant, hundreds of flashes went off. When they walked down the street, photographers followed them. When they went in and out of hotels, everyone was waiting. At first, Elizabeth and Richard denied it. "We're just friends," they said. But the photos didn't lie. They were caught drinking together, laughing, touching each other. The press went crazy. Every day, new headlines. Liz stole Dick. Homewrecker Elizabeth. Will Burton leave his wife? Elizabeth's husband, Eddie. Fisher came to Rome. He visited Elizabeth on set. He came face to face with Richard. The tension was palpable. Eddie asked, "Is something going on between you?" Elizabeth said no, but her eyes were lying. Eddie wasn't stupid. He saw everything. The way Elizabeth looked at Richard was different. The way Richard touched Elizabeth was too intimate. Eddie got angry but couldn't make a scene, because everyone was watching. Paparazzi, crew members, other actors. Eddie smiled, kissed Elizabeth, and left. But deep down, he knew his marriage was over. Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor was born on February 27, 1932 in London. She was a child star. At 12, she became famous with National Velvet. As she grew up, she became more beautiful. Her violet eyes became legendary. Hollywood declared her the most beautiful woman in the world, but she was also the most controversial. Marriages, divorces, scandals. Elizabeth Taylor's life was like a soap opera. In 1950, she married Conrad Hilton Jr. It lasted 8 months. Then Michael Wilding. Then Mike Todd. In 1958, Mike Todd's private plane crashed and he died. Elizabeth was devastated. Her friend Debbie Reynolds supported her. But then Elizabeth fell in love with Debbie's husband, Eddie Fisher. In 1959, Eddie left Debbie and married Elizabeth. America was shocked. She stole her friend's husband, they said. For the first time, Elizabeth was truly hated. But she didn't care. She married Eddie, but the marriage was troubled. Eddie was boring. Elizabeth was looking for excitement. In 1961, 20th Century Fox cast her in Cleopatra. They offered $1 million, the highest actor salary in history. Elizabeth accepted. She moved to Rome. It was a massive production. Thousands of extras, incredible sets, gorgeous costumes. Richard Burton was cast as Mark Antony. Welsh, charismatic, talented. He was married to Sybil Williams. They had 2 children. But Richard was also prone to drinking and women. There was a saying in Hollywood: Burton falls in love with his leading lady on every set. When Elizabeth first saw him, she wasn't impressed. Fat and pockmarked, she said. But when they shot their first scene together, something changed. Electricity, chemistry, attraction. January 1962. Filming continued on the Cleopatra set. Elizabeth and Richard shot scenes every day. Love scenes between Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Kisses, touches, looks. The crew started to notice. This was more than acting. Elizabeth and Richard kept looking at each other even after the camera stopped. During breaks, they sat together. At lunch, they were side by side. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz was getting worried. Something's happening between these two stars, and it's going to lead us to disaster, he told the producers, but nobody listened. The film was already way behind schedule. They couldn't replace the stars. One evening after shooting ended, Elizabeth asked Richard, "Want to go out for dinner?" Richard asked, "What about Eddie?" Elizabeth said, "I don't care about Eddie." That night they went to Rome's most luxurious restaurant. They drank champagne, laughed, talked. Elizabeth was impressed by Richard's intelligence. Richard loved Elizabeth's sense of humor. When they returned to the hotel at midnight, Richard walked Elizabeth to her door. They stopped at the door. They looked at each other. Richard said goodnight. Elizabeth said goodnight, but neither wanted to leave. Richard reached out, touched Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth closed her eyes. Then Richard pulled back. "This is very dangerous," he said. Elizabeth opened her eyes. "I know," she said, "but maybe danger is what we want." Richard laughed. "Are you crazy?" Elizabeth said, "Maybe." And that night, everything began. The next day on set, everyone felt a different energy. Elizabeth was glowing. Richard was smiling. Crew members started whispering, "Something's happening." Over the weekend, Elizabeth threw a party. Richard was invited. Eddie was there too. But Elizabeth spent the night talking to Richard. Eddie sat in the corner, drank, watched. Finally, he couldn't take it, got up and left. Elizabeth didn't even look after him. When the party ended, only Elizabeth and Richard remained. They stood on the balcony, looking at Rome's night view. Richard said, "This is wrong." Elizabeth said, "I know." Richard said, "We're both married." Elizabeth said, "I know." Richard said, "But I can't stop myself." Elizabeth turned, looked at Richard, and said, "Neither can I." They kissed, and everything changed. The Italian paparazzi knew everything. Rome was a small city. Gossip spread fast. Crew members talked. Restaurant waiters talked. Hotel staff talked. Paparazzi started following Elizabeth and Richard. They went everywhere. Sets, restaurants, hotels, beaches. They took photos with long lenses. Elizabeth and Richard were caught walking in Villa Borghese. They were holding hands. Another day they were photographed entering a hotel. It was 3 a.m. and they were both drunk. The paparazzi recorded every move. When Elizabeth and Richard entered a restaurant, photographers looked in through the windows. When they got in a car, motorcycles followed them. They even climbed the building across from Elizabeth's hotel room and tried to shoot photos through the window. When Elizabeth forgot to close the curtains, photos were taken even from her bedroom. One day, Elizabeth lost it. Coming out of the hotel, she yelled at the paparazzi, "Leave us alone! Can't we have any privacy?" A photographer shouted back, "You're public figures. You have no privacy." Elizabeth burst into tears. Richard took her in his arms and got her into the car. But this scene was also photographed and published in newspapers the next day. The photos were sold to Italian newspapers. The headlines were shocking. "Lizzie Dick, Amore Proibito." British and American papers picked up the story. Within days, the whole world was talking about Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's relationship. Elizabeth's manager called in a panic. "What are you doing? Think about Eddie. Think about the children. Think about your career." Elizabeth said, "I don't care." Richard's wife, Sybil Williams, came from London to Rome. She confronted Richard. "Is this true?" she asked. Richard couldn't answer. Sybil cried, "Are you going to leave me and the children?" Richard said, "I don't know. For a woman? For Elizabeth Taylor?" Sybil was furious. Richard said, "Sybil, this is different. I love her." Sybil slapped him. "You loved. Are you going to forget our 20 years of marriage?" Richard fell silent. Sybil returned to London. She said she'd file for divorce. Eddie Fisher didn't give up either. He came back to Rome. He tried to convince Elizabeth, "Please, end this relationship. We're a family." Elizabeth said, "Eddie, I don't love you." "Maybe I never did," Eddie said. "But you married me." Elizabeth said, "I made a mistake. When Mike died, I was alone. You were there." "But that wasn't love," Eddie said. "So Richard is love?" Elizabeth said, "Yes." Eddie was crushed, but he didn't leave. "I'll fight." I won't give you up that easily. Elizabeth said, Eddie, please. This will only hurt all of us more. But Eddie didn't listen. He made a statement to the press. Elizabeth and I are happy. These rumors are baseless. But nobody believed it. March 1962. The scandal grew so big that even the Vatican had to get involved. The Pope's official newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, published an article about Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor is an immoral woman. She is against the values of the Catholic Church. A married woman is sinning with another married man. This is unacceptable. Even the Italian government reacted. A minister said Elizabeth Taylor should be deported from Italy. The American press went crazy. TV shows debated for hours. Women's organizations boycotted Elizabeth. We won't watch her movies, they said. Churches used Elizabeth as an example in sermons, a woman who fell into the devil's trap. For the first time, Elizabeth was scared. Her career was in danger. 20th Century Fox was worried. If this continues, we'll cancel the film, they said. Elizabeth made a statement to the press. I don't have a relationship with Richard Burton. We're just friends. But nobody believed it, because the plen. Next day, new photos came out. Elizabeth and Richard were kissing on a boat on the island of Capri. There was no point in denying it anymore. Elizabeth gave up. She decided to tell the truth. She held a press conference. Yes, I love Richard Burton. I'm divorcing Eddie. I don't care what anyone says. The room went into shock. Reporters shouted, what about Richard's wife and children? Elizabeth said, this is our private life. Nobody can interfere. But the world had interfered. Cleopatra filming continued in chaos. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz was going crazy. This isn't a film set, it's a circus, he'd say. Elizabeth kept getting sick. Richard kept drinking. Paparazzi tried to get on set. Filming was postponed for days. 20th Century Fox was running out of money. The studio head said, this film will bankrupt us. Expenses reached $44 million, the most expensive film ever made. But they feared it wouldn't even make $10 million at the box office. Finally, in June 1963, the film was released. Critics were mixed. Visually stunning but weak story, they said. But the public was curious. Everyone wanted to see Elizabeth and Richard. Let's watch the real love scenes, they said. The film achieved unexpected success. It made $57 million at the box office. There was still a loss, but it was much better than expected. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's scandal had been the best promotion for the film. 1964. Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor divorced. Sybil Williams and Richard Burton divorced. On March 15th, 1964, Elizabeth and Richard got married in Montreal. The world was shocked. Does the scandal have a happy ending? But the happiness was short-lived. Elizabeth and Richard were madly in love, but couldn't live together. They fought constantly. They both drank heavily. Richard was jealous and controlling. Elizabeth was rebellious and independent. One night, Richard came home drunk and yelled at Elizabeth, "You ruined me. My career, my family, everything ended because of you." Tears streamed down Elizabeth's face. "I didn't force you to come, Richard. You came on your own." Richard collapsed. "I know, but I can't go back now." "You're my curse," Elizabeth said, "and you're mine." In 1974, they divorced, but they couldn't forget each other. In 1975, they remarried. Everyone said, maybe it'll work this time. But no, the fights, drinking, jealousy continued. In 1976, they divorced again. This time, forever. Richard was with other women. Elizabeth married other men. But both searched for each other for years. Richard died in 1984 at 58 from a brain hemorrhage. Elizabeth was devastated. She didn't go to the funeral, but sent a letter. "You were my only true love. I'll always love you." In Richard's pocket, they found an unfinished letter he'd written to Elizabeth the day he died. "Liz, I still love you. I'll always love you. My biggest mistake was losing you." The Cleopatra scandal wasn't just a love story. It changed the way Hollywood worked forever. Studios could no longer protect their stars. Paparazzi had become powerful. There was no such thing as privacy anymore. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton became the pioneers of modern celebrity culture. After them, every star became known for their scandals, divorces, relationships. The paparazzi industry became a billion-dollar business, and the Vatican never commented on another Hollywood star again, because they realized they couldn't control it anymore. Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011. She was 79 years old. She'd had 8 marriages. She'd been involved in dozens of scandals, but she went down in history as Hollywood's last true queen. Brave, rebellious, uncontrollable. She never bowed to anyone. And she loved Richard Burton, the love of her life, forever.